Why, hello, welcome. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, Liv, because who else would it be? Once again, I am here with a conversation episode, and once again, I am recording the introduction so far in advance that somehow I just feel like, what should I be saying other than what the episode is about? I don't even know. We're having a weird brain moment. Today's conversation was with Chiara Baldini, who, oh my God, we had such an interesting conversation. It is ostensibly about Dionysus, and it is primarily about Dionysus, but we also talked about, I don't even know how to put it all into words. We talked about the prehistoric mother goddess and how Dionysus fits into that. We talked about Bronze Age Crete. It was very well timed, having, by the time I'm recording this, it's still only a few weeks after my Bronze Age series, even if I realize by the time you listen, it'll be a little while, but still. We talk about Bronze Age Crete and how that ties in with Dionysus and all of these prehistoric mother goddess concepts. As much as I am airing this episode during Pride Month, and the intention was originally to focus mostly on the more sort of gender non-conforming aspects of Dionysus, we do talk about that, but definitely went a little deeper into the whole connection with the mother goddess, which doesn't not fit into that part of him. Generally, this is it's all about Dionysus, but also ancient psychedelics and the use of psychedelics. That's how it begins. Looking at, ancient drugs and psychedelics and how that kind of ties in with Dionysus and the Maenads and the Bacchanalias and these kind of wild, free reigning parties that they, held and that had all of the women's spaces that it came with. And oh my gosh, there's just so much. I'm just going to let the episode speak for itself. Conversations Beyond the Binary, the Divine Madness of Dionysus with Chiara Baldini. Actually, first, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit about why you talk about Dionysus in this way, or whatever you want to share about your work.
Yeah, so my name is Chiara Baldini, and I'm Italian from a little town near Florence. And my encounter with Dionysus happened through festivals. So I started going to festivals around my mid-20s. And I had a degree in English linguistics, so nothing to do with history or mythology or anthropology, nothing. And I just went to this amazing festival in Portugal called Boom Festival. And after a very intense first night in the dance floor, in the morning, I went to my friend and I said, you have to remind me, I have to research how did we get here. Is this something new? Is this a new way of doing something old? Because I could feel the power of this experience of collective altered state of consciousness. And it was something that united people in a way that I had never experienced before.
Yeah.
It was like a very large dance floor with maybe 15,000 people. And the connection, the bond that it created was just out of this world. And so in this search that was very spontaneous and unpredictable, and, I didn't put also a goal at the end of my search. I want to go on this quest. And I remember Dionysus because I remember studying something in school, but very vaguely. So I started from him, and I started book after book, very spontaneously, and then I learned about mystery religions, and I was hooked. and this was 20 years ago. This year is 20
Oh, wow.
years ago.
I love that. I mean, what a fascinating way to get into this subject. I'm so glad I asked. But yeah, I mean, it's easy to become obsessed with this stuff once you learn just a little bit, especially when you get to mystery religions. Like, I absolutely love everything surrounding that. So what a fun, I mean, what an interesting way of coming to Dionysus. Like, I feel like he would really appreciate that, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, festivals also are a way to make it very alive. It's real.
Yeah.
It's not something that you read that happened sometime 2,500 years ago. This is something that can happen still today, that kind of energy, that kind of, also the techniques, dancing over repetitive beats over long periods of time. This is what they used to do. They had these frame drums, and we had electronic music that is just an amplified frame drum, basically. Or I call frame drums portable sound systems. And so dancing over repetitive beats over a long period of time, ingesting psychotropic substances, these two techniques by themselves can trigger, the appearance, the epiphany of Dionysus. Also, I mean, in Dionysian rituals, they also used the sexuality, apparently, which did not happen in a, festival dance floor, but maybe not yet.
Well, it might have happened somewhere on that dance floor, I wouldn't really be surprised.
True.
Yeah, it is so timeless, right? I mean, that's why I love all of Greek mythology, is because as much as so much of it and the ancient religions can feel really separated from us today. Like, they ultimately at their core, everything is timeless. It's all just these different ways of seeing these very natural things when it comes to humanity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I also see how, I had the experience in a festival. It's a psytrance festival. Psytrance is a specific kind of electronic music. But, people had that experience in the 60s, for example. I connect a lot to the 60s counterculture, which was the first moment in history after the witch hunts that we were not burned alive for, practicing certain techniques, as I say.
Yeah.
And it just reappeared in a spontaneous way because, dancing freely with the body, this also didn't happen for so long. And, those people in the 60s were, and in the 50s also starting, and then in the 60s, they were the first to restart using the body and daring to move in ways which had been forbidden for a long time. So daring also to trigger certain insights and epiphanies and just states of mind that were not allowed for a while, especially in this collective setting, with a lot of people around. And so also those experiences in the 60s for me is like a spontaneous resurgence of certain practices that belong to us in such a, at the DNA level, because also we talk about Dionysus, but actually Dionysian rituals were the Greek version of something much older. We go back to the Paleolithic probably. And so it's something that is so hardwired inside of us that we just do it, as soon as we can.
Yeah. That's such an interesting way of seeing it. Like, I rarely have looked too deep into the psychotropic like nature of these rituals. But I'm so fascinated by it. And yeah, just this idea that it is so timeless, and especially when it comes to these like very natural means of achieving that, like these things are from nature, and people have just forever found these ways of utilizing them.
Yeah, but also I want to add here, so there's the techniques, And, if we're talking about the psychotropic side of it, I can also mention psychedelics. And, if we talk about mysteries of Eleusis, there is many theories now more and more pointing and even scientifically proving that there was an LSD-like compound used in the initiation in Eleusis to Demeter and Persephone. But then, similar substances were also used to spike the wine of Dionysian rituals. But psychedelics and psychotropics in general, they are non-specific amplifiers. This is a definition by Stan Grof, that was one of the pioneers of psychedelic therapy and holotropic breathwork, etc. So if they are non-specific amplifiers, this means that the outcome also depends on the spiritual, political set and setting of the people or the group of people using them. So I believe that the Dionysian rituals are a specific lineage of these practices that are associated with specific values and beliefs. So, and now if we go to the 60s and the hippies, we used to believe that psychedelics would turn anyone into a hippie, love and peace for everyone.
Yeah.
And actually, according to the definition of Grof, it's not like this. And so if you put psychedelics in the water system of a city, we used to think, yeah, let's do that. And everybody turns into this love and peace, nature loving person. Actually, it's not like that, because shamanic rituals were used by with all kinds of intentions. Now we're bordering with magic. And there is also black magic, and there is also, ways to use shamanism, techniques of ecstasy to reach different kinds of outcomes according to different kinds of intentions and different kinds of value and belief systems.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, as someone who pays too close attention, I think, to the horrors of humanity, that yeah, it's not always going to result in the same type of effect. Definitely.
Yeah, because also these are spaces where you become very vulnerable, and so you can always find someone that want to take advantage of that vulnerability. And we see this, for example, now in ayahuasca ceremonies, where you can find a charlatan that's going to give you the worst experience of your life and maybe even being abused. But actually, you can also find amazing people holding space for the ceremony and have the most transformational and incredible experience of your life. So similarly, also, I see that the Dionysian tradition was connected to specific values, and we can go deeper into that. But at the same time, I don't want to idealize them and also say that, human nature is what it is. It's very ambiguous, like Dionysus himself. And so, the outcome really depends on the integrity of the set and setting and the values that you want to enhance in that experience.
Well, not to I'd love if we can connect it back to this, but I also want, to focus on, we talked about in our emails, we talked about, looking at Dionysus as this pre-patriarchal figure, this, I don't want to say prehistoric, but obviously like a lot of it is going to come into a prehistoric period, if not all, I would say. But, it's become it's always been my obsession to talk about everything outside of the patriarchy. But recently, looking at these figures where, we know that they existed before the particularly patriarchal nature of those who came later, but all of the writing tends to be from that patriarchal period. So we often are lost in terms of like an actual kind of, a written history of what happened. And we're working instead with archaeological discoveries and things. So I would just generally love to hear all about that nature of Dionysus and maybe how it connects to what you've been talking about. But also, to look at how Dionysus fits outside of the binary alongside this pre-patriarchal. Like, I have so many questions or I have so many, I just want to hear everything, basically.
Yeah, but actually this is exactly the point of contact. The fact that he's a pre-patriarchal god, so coming from a tradition that goes way back, from, let's take classical Greece as a point of reference, which is more or less 5th century BC. So we have to look at what was coming before. And, in a way, the myths that we have is like a fluorescence of something, like the mycelium image of something that is underground and that comes up in mushrooms here and there. It's something that was already present in the cultural substratum of people for a long time before it came out and was coded in the myths that we still have.
Yeah.
So, when I was looking back, okay, so Dionysus arrives like this, we know about the Maenads rituals already happening maybe back to the 7th, 8th century BC. But what was behind? Because also Dionysus has so many characteristics that make him stand out, culturally, really. The fact that he's so ambiguous, that he's not a man or a woman, and that he's divine and childlike at the same time, and an animal and a god, and something from nature, but also something that helps people to live together in cities and also gave rise to the theater. There's so many contradictions, but actually when we look at all these characteristics, the fact that he was very loved by women, or women were a big part and a prominent part in the way that initiations were organized, the fact that everyone was allowed to be initiated, whether you were a slave or an emperor or whoever. He was a very democratic god. So, and the fact that he's also an anti-tyrannical god, like in the Bacchae by Euripides. So he's, the at the antipodes of Pentheus. And challenging this tyrant and challenging the ways and the rules and the do's and don'ts of tyranny. When you look at it from the perspective, okay, but he comes from another culture. He comes from a culture where women had prominent positions. There was probably a much more egalitarian social arrangement. And there were not all these rules about, gender identity, sexual orientation. This is all stuff that is very patriarchal, like this creation of the hierarchization of opposites. Men and woman, men on top of woman, heterosexual, homosexual, heterosexual on top, like this. Creating these categories where one is superior to the other is a very patriarchal thing, is what patriarchy does. Body and mind, irrational and rational. So in another non-patriarchal society, then you understand, where Dionysus come from, where all of these rules don't make sense anymore. And so where, also in terms of politics, because I like to go there, I like to look at, okay, but so politically, how did it work? And I recently learned about the way that the Dionysian people, the people belonging to the Thiazi, that were the associations, private associations that were organizing the initiations. I recently learned how those people participating in those organizations supported and even facilitated the beginning of democracy in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they were already taking decisions in a way that everybody had a vote, and that everyone was participating to the organization in a more egalitarian way, apparently created in them through the practice also, because Dionysian rituals are spaces where these dichotomies and rules of what's okay and what's not kind of like fall down, and everybody's on the same level. When you're high, you can be whoever you want, but you're still, high as everybody else. It's really powerful, in terms of breaking of the hierarchies. And so these people had this experience in their bones. They had an embodied experience of equality. And so, the step was small, was short, to then, okay, let's get rid of this oligarchic rule, this rule of the few, the rule of the rich people, and let's imagine and put in practice a radically new system. Of course, it was already a patriarchal situation, so it was mainly a boys' club, this Athenian democracy.
Was it ever?
So I also wonder how the women participating in the rituals and, being priestesses of Dionysus and initiating men in Dionysian rituals, I wonder how it was for them to really realize, okay, we're really out of this game. And I think often about how they must have felt. But so this is just an example of something that maybe was coming from another culture, that was coming from before, and this was just what was left, and the kind of possibilities that were left in 5th century Athens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of the things I talk about most often, on the show, is just how much of all of the mythology that survives, for the most part, save some sources, does come from this classical period or later, and so often specifically documented in Athens and all these different things, and kind of what that might say about what existed not only beyond Athens but before, right? I just recently finished a whole month of episodes on the Bronze Age, and looking at all that we know and we don't know, because when it comes to the Bronze Age, we're really lacking in textual sources, and instead we're working with a lot of archaeological record and things like that, and we know that Dionysus was part of it, but we don't know too much, and it's such an interesting thing to imagine. And well, Dionysus generally is always been one of my favorites for every reason you've already said. Just this nature of him, how he just doesn't fit into anything, and kind of what that really means. How he is this very ancient god, but also this very young god, and how he both comes from the East mythologically, but also Thebes, and all the ways that you can kind of see the mythographers trying to navigate how he doesn't fit, right? Like these are all these attempts to explain what remained of this god that was clearly so ancient and still so confusing to them, in this classical period, that they really had to kind of bend over backwards to make him fit into these various narratives. And what that ultimately says about the very concept of Dionysus. And it's just there's so many questions and so many interesting things about the character broadly.
But so maybe we can go because, we're circling around it.
Yeah.
And we haven't mentioned it. So the name Dionysus was found written for the first time in the 13th century BC as part of these tablets written in Linear B on the island of Crete. So 13th century BC on the island of Crete, there was the Mycenaean culture, which arrived more or less in 1450 BC. So it was the beginning of Mycenaean culture in Crete, when they arrived there. Mycenaean culture was already present in the mainland at Mycene and other places. Was a very typical Bronze Age culture with warrior aristocrats and being buried with their swords, and it was
their gold masks,
the gold masks and all of that, very patriarchal, rule of the power to take life. If you, for the people who read Ryan Eisler, The Chalice and the Blade, the dominator societies, they worship the power to take life. So this is the time when really it's full on. The more powerful you are powerful if you have a lot of power to take life, which is still now how it is, because the most powerful nation is the one with the biggest army. The stronger are your weapons, the more political power you have in the world, arena. I always like to bring it back to the present. So this was Mycenaean culture in Crete, but the Mycenaeans, they found another culture in Crete, which were the Minoans or Minoans, which was a more ancient culture that was already there and has been there probably since the 6th millennia BC, and evolved into the Minoans. And they were a very different kind of culture, the opposite. And if you look at the art, you see it, because Minoan art is just sublime. The way that nature is represented, the octopus, the shells, the dolphins, the sensuality that is expressed also in representing the human body, and these priestesses with bare breasts and goddesses that are just so hot women.
What you can't see is that my desk is littered with I have a bunch of coasters with various Minoan pieces of art that I've gotten across Greece. And my arm is tattooed with a great number of Minoan art pieces.
Oh my God.
I'm with you on all of that. Absolutely. Yeah. I have a real soft spot in my heart for the Minoan culture.
Yeah, but Minoans is the kind of culture and the kind of iconography that either you know it and you're obsessed, or you don't know it and you're about to get obsessed.
Yeah.
There's no other way around. And so this culture that was there before, it has been puzzling researchers for decades, because like Dionysus, it doesn't fit. It's weird. It happened, it flourished in the Bronze Age, but it doesn't have the characteristics that make a civilization, in the Bronze Age. They are considered a civilization because they had monumental buildings, they had some level of centralized administration, representing some kind of early state. But then nothing else is there. No fortified towns, no iconographical representation of the power to take life, basically. No representations of war. So
you don't think the double axes would be applicable in that? Just out of curiosity?
Double axes are generally considered ceremonial.
Right. More sacrificial type stuff.
Yes, or symbolic. It could have been a symbol that they just carry. It doesn't necessarily, need to be used as a tool, or it could have been used also in sacrificial settings, maybe to slaughter animals for sacrifices. But there is a very conspicuous absence of images of war.
No, that is very true now that I think more about it. It's all dancing and bull jumping and
Yes, and
yeah.
celebrating and lots of
Yeah.
priestesses together and absence of individualization.
Mm-hmm.
So, because, this is compared to the neighboring civilizations, which were the Egyptians, the Hittites in Anatolia, and the Sumerians.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you look at palatial iconography of these civilizations, you always have important kings, like who did, with their deeds or gestures, how do you say, like what they did in life written down.
Yeah.
And them slaughtering the enemy and like killing the lion because they are stronger than the lion and stomping on top of the enemies. This is how they would enforce their power over the people, by showing that they can kill you.
Mm-hmm.
When Arthur Evans in 1900 started digging Knossos, that is the biggest and most famous palace in Minoan Crete, he found dolphins and flowers and lots of bare-breasted priestesses, and even like processions of male dignitaries offering gifts to a female figure that was clearly depicted in an authority position. So there was clear representations of women in positions of authority, and there was no representation of men in position with that kind of authority. There's many men. There's not that men don't exist. They're very beautiful, scantily dressed. How do you say scantily clad?
Holding fish sometimes in the ones from Akrotiri.
Bringing fish. Yes.
Yeah.
Or bringing gifts, bringing beautiful, because the ceramics that these people would make is just unbelievable. Like the spirit of the people you really see from the art. And so, the researchers the archaeologists were like, okay, so we have the first civilization in European territory. We are supposed, also back then at the beginning of the 1900s, even more so, it was this colonial attitude that we had to prove the Western superiority, towards like everybody else. And how, and then they were left with this civilization with all these priestesses and dolphins. Like, okay, so, Arthur Evans was like, okay, this throne, when he found the throne, this throne belonged to King Minos, the legendary king of Crete, which was what we knew from the Homeric Odyssey, from the Odyssey by Homer, which came way after the Minoans.
So much later,
So probably Minos was a Mycenaean king. Maybe, someone like him did exist, but much later. Because when we're talking about the flourishing of the Minoan civilization, it's between 1700s and 1450 BC. So, like 1,000 years before classical Greece, it's a long time for a civilization of, like to exist. Because until then, they thought that Greece was the first civilization of Europe. Yeah. So they found the people that inspired the Greek civilization that came later. But it was hard to really give a realistic interpretation of what it was. They didn't have the tools. They couldn't understand it. So King Minos was defined as, the guy who sat on the throne. But then there were no depictions of this king on the walls that they reconstructed, painstakingly, all these pieces. Again, there were only women. And so apparently Arthur Evans put together this, it's the Lily Prince or Prince of Lilies, but it was like a Frankenstein-esque operation of putting different pieces that he found on the floor together, because this headdress that he has is usually associated with priestesses Also, the color of the skin is not really clear, because usually white is the color of women, and this darker brown is the color of men, and the color of the lily prints is not clear. And so he said, okay, this is the priest king of the palace, and the palace is the residence of this monarchy that is ruling over the whole of Crete, and with this powerful fleet, they're ruling over the whole of the Aegean Sea. But, because he was British, so he was also trying to recreate a British.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, he was incredibly skewed in his assessments of it.
So then, with years, more and more, we know about the Minoans, and we know that, let's keep in mind, so we are doing this search because Crete is the first place where we found the name Dionysus written down. So,
and let's not forget that we don't know what they'd written down in Linear A.
Yes.
Because that's its own whole fascinating, idea, because obviously Linear B was introduced by the Mycenaeans. So it is,
And Linear B was an Indo-European language. Linear A is a not even pre, it's a non-Indo-European language. And so we don't know how non-patriarchal people used to talk. We have no idea. We know that the word labyrinth is from Linear A. Which is very interesting, because also Labris is the name of the double axe. That was one of the main symbols. And the palaces were like labyrinths. They were not fortified, but they were built in a way that if you don't know your way around, you only get to specific places that were the more public spaces, like the central court, like this big space in the middle. But then, like the throne room even is underground and not easy to access, and other spaces. So these palaces were multifunctional with religious, political, administrative, but also workshops for the production of different, like pottery or weaving, or also storage for wine, oil, cereals. So they were not built by slaves. This is the big difference also. All these other palaces of like the pyramids or the ziggurats, they are built by slaves.
Well, the pyramids weren't technically built by slaves. They were paid and everything.
Still, it was not like the people deciding.
No, definitely, yeah. I just want to clarify, because I know that's a long-standing, miss history. Yeah.
But also, do we really know, like, if everybody got paid? Maybe someone got paid and someone couldn't get paid, because slavery always, not always, but existed a lot.
Of course, yeah. No, not to say it didn't exist. I just know that,
So apparently, the people built the palaces, and there were palaces in many different centers on Crete. So also,
and how do we know that the people built them?
Because there's no evidence of slavery.
But that doesn't clarify necessarily. Just like I'm just curious if there is anything that clarifies
the thing is, the fact that these are not fortified also make them into spaces for the people.
Yes.
The fact that people would work there and would use them in many different ways, and the fact that there's no proof whatsoever that these were residences of the elite. So this question also of the elite is not clear, because it's not the kind of elite based on wealth that then translates into political power. So the concept of palace is problematic, and the concept of elite is problematic in Minoan Crete. So you have, the feminists came later and said, feminist scholars, and said, so if there was an elite, maybe there were priestesses. But then again, it's the kind of service that you give to the community. It's not something that you do for your own gain of, your own prestige. And that's also probably why there was no representation of individuality. because priestesses were represented as any other priestess that came before and after, because this was like a service that you perform in service of the community. So it's not in service of your own gain, like most of elites, but in service of the people. So there is all of these narratives that are still very debated. And, you know, also then Maria Gimbuta's work came into the game. The Lithuanian, I don't know if you ever speak about her.
No, I feel like I've heard of her. I need to do more research.
Yeah, because this is like a good point for, you know, like imagining a non-patriarchal world, because she's a Lithuanian archaeologist. So she was educated and became, how do you say, like an expert in her field. She was excavating in Central Eastern Europe. So being from Lithuania, also, she died in the 90s. So, you know, she grew up in the time of Soviet Union. And so imagine being a woman and making your way in this world in the 40s and 50s. And she became a leading expert of Neolithic archaeology. So she was excavating these cultures in Eastern Central Europe that she called Old Europe. And she identified this cluster of cultures that happened in between the 5,000 and 3,500 BC. So let's, you know, think about it. Maybe 5,000 BC is a long, it's Neolithic time. So these are people that were using agriculture as a main form of sustenance, but also were using foraging, and they created these megasites. And now they're given this name megasites. If you look it up, part of them are even in Ukraine. So where now there is this war that is still raging, there used to be these cultures of peace that managed to live together. They managed to create cities in the Neolithic that were way bigger than any other settlement in those years anywhere in the world, but without any evidence of centralized government. So Gimbuta said that this is what she called the civilization of the goddess, because also with the hundreds of clay figurines, so everybody's more or less familiar with these goddess figurines. So hundreds and hundreds, like they were like staples of every house. And they were also with miniature replicas of houses, of ovens, of like recreating these social worlds in a way where women had a prominent role, because in Neolithic societies founded on agriculture, it was also kind of intuitive that women had this prominent role, because women are the ones that were the experts of plants, of the domestication of plants, of the different uses of plants and how to transform plants into food. You know, they had a different role than later. And so these megasites, this culture of the goddess, this way of organizing themselves peacefully, for 800 years, these places existed. And they were building houses and burning them on top of each other. So that they created these mounds also that are huge, like 300 acres. Like,
wow.
Or hectares. Now I have to look, because I always mix, but like huge.
Big, yeah.
Huge, concentrical, so that if you look at them, whatever, you know, they managed to reconstruct from above, it looks like a tree that has been cut, and you see the concentrical rings.
Wow.
All, you know, like a bit irregular, very organic.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Gimbuta said, okay, there was a culture that was coming from Anatolia. So if you go even before that, because agriculture comes from Anatolia, from the Fertile Crescent that is in the Near East. And then Çatalhöyük, this famous Neolithic settlement in Anatolia. So now with the ancient DNA studies, we can prove that she was right, that actually these people were coming from Anatolia. And the same people that were coming from Anatolia created both what she called Old Europe, and then they also went to Crete. Anatolian farmers is the name of the DNA. This is non-Indo-European, and this is non-patriarchal. And so it doesn't mean that they didn't have conflicts. It doesn't mean that it's like this mega peaceful angel. It means that they had ways to deal with conflicts that were not about creating chronic warfare. There is a difference.
Yeah.
There is a difference.
Yeah.
You can have all the conflicts you want and not have chronic warfare.
Yeah.
Which, to us today, we're supposed to be the end of this ladder of progress.
Yeah.
And we are stuck in chronic warfare.
Yeah.
So they survived 800 years there without chronic warfare. They had figured out something that we've never figured out afterwards. So Gimbuth has said, this people is the same culture that funded Minoan Crete, Neolithic Crete and then Minoan Crete. So she says that Minoan Crete is the last surviving civilization of the goddess. So non-patriarchal civilization that survived longer just because they were more south. And so when these nomadic steppe people started coming from the Caspian, from these steppes on to the north of the Caspian Sea, that were these nomadic pastoralist, patrilinear, because the others were matrilinear, people who brought patriarchy, basically, to Europe. When they came, and first they arrived there in Old Europe, and it was not pretty what happened. We also know from the DNA now, like the Y chromosome of the Neolithic people that were living there, the male chromosome disappears within a few generations, almost disappears. So this means that men were systematically killed. Women were used to create a new lineage because they were patrilinear. So the important thing is who's your father.
Right.
Doesn't matter who's your mother. They would take women from different villages. Doesn't matter. So now we know that there was a big shift in culture. We don't know, if it was all like this and if there were situations where it was more peaceful or a merging of cultures or not. No. But what I wanted to say is Minoan Crete, because it was more south, they only arrived with the Mycenaeans. Right. And even that now we know with the DNA analysis that Mycenaeans were a mix of Anatolian DNA and steppe ancestry DNA. So, it's all pieces of the puzzle. And this, from this perspective, Minoans make sense. Because also they were the only people that turned, that they had a writing system, paved roads and public sewage systems. Like they created some kind of administration also, that they were using these ring seals. We still don't know how, because the images are so creative and crazy. And how this was part of a bureaucracy, it's like only them, they can be so creative. And they were a different lineage of culture, completely different, where women and what women care about. So, not having wars that kill your children. This is what, in theory, women should care about. And also having a kind of like ecstatic, religious merging with nature, which also is part of Minoan iconography, and dancing and, all these activities that we like this they were the only ones that survived long enough to, create also these forms of socio-political organizations that resembles what we call a civilization. Of course, Maria Gimbutas was saying we should call civilization what they were already doing in the 5000 BC.
Yeah.
That is a civilization, because these people lived peacefully for 800 years.
Yeah.
Finding ways to organize themselves and scale up the settlement as much as you want and have a minimal footprint on the environment. They were amazing.
Yeah.
So I spoke a lot.
No. I know. I'm taking it all in, and of course it's unsurprising, but ridiculous that what to us defines a quote unquote civilization is something patriarchal. Like, it's just we can't fathom the idea that that humanity had civilizations before the men took over, before they took control. Like, it's just it's both fascinating and infuriating, and so how, if I'd love to, I'm fascinated by all of this, but I also want to bring back Dionysus into it, and because I'm just curious, how it is that this kind of most ancient form of him as a character or a concept, fits. Basically, I'm just so curious about the nature of him, in this kind of fluidity kind of way, this gender fluidity.
So. Wait, before that, I wanted to mention his identity as a vegetation god, because this is what connects to the Minoans.
Yeah.
So the main deity, and some people say we cannot really talk about, how do you call it? A
monotheism?
Yeah, I'm menopausal, so I have this brain fog moments. Yeah, we can we talk about monotheism, or is some kind of polytheism where a goddess is still kind of like this overarching figure?
Yeah.
But so there was this mountain goddess. She's represented in iconography, and even Arthur Evans had to say, okay, they were worshipping a goddess.
She's there. Yeah.
No. I have to also, the beginning of the 1900s or the end of the 1800s was when it came out, these books about primitive matriarchies. Gimbutas came much later, and her take is different. But already this myth of the Great Mother was already starting, because these goddess figurines were already circulating.
I mean, they're everywhere. It's so obvious that there was a prehistoric mother goddess.
It's pretty obvious.
Everywhere.
And also, when you look at Greek mythologies, it goes back to the mother of the gods many times.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I recently did a whole episode looking at how the theogony also kind of exists as almost a documentation of the fall of the mother goddess, the slow subjugation of goddesses in favor of their more powerful gods. Ostensibly it's just the theogony, but it's you can kind of see it as this sort of evidence of what happened in this kind of prehistoric period.
So there's many indications that there was this female figure that was in a way a mother, but in another way also a representation that is very raw of nature, because she could give life, she could also take life, and she could regenerate life. So these three aspects, also according to Gimbutas, are the three aspects of this Neolithic goddess figure that is connected to nature. Life giver, death wielder, and regeneratrix. That's the words that they use. So this figure is the one presiding over the so-called fertility rituals, which is another buzzword that we heard 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Which is connected to having rituals in specific moments of the year in connection to both the life cycles of plants, but also the cycles of the moon and certain stars. So it was like this connection between life on Earth and what happens in the sky. Very powerful. And with the third world being the underworld. So these rituals, like the mysteries of Eleusis is a very, Western example, because also there is other examples in other cultures. But like Demeter is an example of this goddess. And Persephone going, in the myth, she goes in the underworld, and then she can come out only for a specific amount of time. And this is connected to these cycles of the life of plants. So apparently also, reconnecting to Crete, Demeter herself, in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, she says, I was kidnapped by the pirates from the shores of Crete against my will and by force. So there is a strong connection between the mysteries of Eleusis in terms really of the mythology of this, the archetype that Demeter and Persephone represent, also as the mother and the daughter, as Mother Nature giving life to plants. And Persephone is also Kore, which means also the sprout. And so these two forms of life, let's say, where one is this goddess that represents existence, like Demeter, existence in the way that never was born and will never die. And then there is this other element that is Persephone, in the case of Demeter and Persephone, that represents life on earth, that dies and is reborn, dies and is reborn, with the goddess presiding over this rebirth and ensuring this rebirth. And men would pray that this cycle would go on and on and on, because then they would feel that they're part of these cycles, and their soul will reborn, and their body also will be reborn. Like they would participate in this chain of existence that will happen forever, and find comfort in feeling part of these grand cycles of life. So this is the mythological matrix that is also, recreated in the myth of Inanna and Dumuzi, or Ishtar and Tammuz, or Cybele and Attis, all the mystery religions, also Isis and Osiris. There is this dying and resurrecting god, in the case of Persephone, a woman. So Dionysus is the vegetation god, and the mother goddess of the mountain of Crete was his mother. Because he's missing, who's this powerful female figure that is, his original mother, not Semele, because Semele was also a later version of that, because she's also, the name is connected to earth, and so she's an earth mother.
I'm curious about the mother goddess being his, this kind of this older mother form. Like, so where is that coming from?
So this is also what Gimbutas says, that he was originally a vegetation god from Crete.
Okay.
So the fact that he's, because also in these kinds of mythologies, like this specific mythological matrix that is reconnected to these dying and resurrecting gods, the celebrations were always ecstatic. So all celebrations of this mother goddess are ecstatic. Dionysus is like someone that misses this mythological counterpart.
Right.
And only, when we think about this previous provenance from Minoan Crete, we could find this powerful goddess that kind of like instructed him also in his rites. So if we think about the myth of Dionysus, the one where he is born of Semele and Zeus, but then Zeus appears as a god in front of her, and she is burnt, and so he takes the baby and put in the thigh. And then, but what happened later, so he goes, he's born as a child, he's given to the nymphs, he goes to Mount Nisa, I don't know how you say. So what happens afterwards is that Hera, still jealous, which is also a very patriarchal thing of these jealous wives and being
poor Hera
betrayed by these guys doing whatever they want is just horrible. So Hera, according to this myth that of course was coded later and later.
Yeah.
So she drives him crazy by, he gets drunk or she drives him crazy in some way. And he is wandering completely like in this altered state of consciousness that he cannot, he's losing his mind, which is also what can happen in a state of altered state. You can also become psychotic. So he's being psychotic until he finally reaches Rhea. So he goes to Rhea, which represent again one of these iconographic or archetypal figures of the mother of the gods.
Oh yeah.
And Rhea takes care of him, gives him the instruments for his rites, like the tympanon and probably the aulos, the flute, and teaches him the rites. So that she teaches him a lineage, a kind of practice that would make sure that his altered state is beneficial and is not a psychotic state. So again, there is this connection between Dionysus with this powerful female, ancient mother of gods kind of female figure that is an expert of ecstatic rites. So shamanic rituals, we can say, something that comes from way back when we were mentioning the Paleolithic. And she is the one kind of like passing the baton in this moment. It's very moving for me because it feels like the old pre-patriarchal culture kind of saying, okay, now it's you. Now you will become the protagonist of the story. I've been the protagonist for a long time. Now it's you. Whether she likes it or not, and he becomes this vegetation god that is connected to ecstatic rituals and more connected also to wine. And then he becomes the god of wine and then theater and everything else. But I really see it like a Netflix series where the first seasons you have the mother as the protagonist.
Yeah.
And then at some point it's the son.
Yeah.
Son/lover, because also there was this dichotomy. Like we never know if it's a son or a lover.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting. It's so fascinating to look at the ways in which these stories do transition and these characters transition. And if the baton was going to be passed to any god, it's nice that it was him, because he's very kind to all genders. He's not the patriarchy that everyone else is, at least.
Yeah, it had to be him, or he became, if we look at him from this perspective, he will always be the son of that goddess, and he represents her culture in the patriarchal world. That's the inheritance that she gives him. Okay, now it's you. And he's taking it on like, yes, I will represent, even as myself, a kind of male, quote unquote, but will represent your culture. So a culture where women have prominent positions, they are empowered in representing the female side of creation, or how to say, maybe we can mention after what happened in Rome and the problems with the prominent role of women in the rites of Bacchus.
Yeah.
But so women had a prominent role in the culture of Dionysus.
Yeah.
Everybody was allowed, no matter, this egalitarian, the value of equality. So important to stress again and again. The fact that everybody can be in their full expression of who they are, no matter what they like in sexuality, what are their tastes, if they're non-binary, because non-binary people always existed. Even to a certain extent, trans people always existed. And these were the places, these rituals were the safe spaces for these people. Dionysus welcomed everyone, and which was also a problem. And this connection to homosexuality or non-heterosexuality, let's say, is also interesting that I'm starting to find all these references connecting non-heterosexuality to Crete. Again, if you read, probably, I don't know if you've read it, by a guy called Arthur Evans, but is not Arthur Evans of Minoan, Crete.
Yeah.
The god of ecstasy, sex, roles, and the madness of Dionysus. So this was a gay guy that wrote in the 80s in New York, quite an amazing scholar, because he really goes to look into Dionysus as a non-heterosexual god. Sometimes I hesitate to say queer because also it's such a modern word, but
non-heteronormative also works, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because it wasn't just the heterosexual, just the general, non-heteronormative. Yeah.
So, for example, in that book, I found out that Plato, commenting on the myth of Ganymedes, I don't know how you say.
Ganymede. Yeah.
And Zeus, because they have a love story, they say, this myth must have come from Crete. That's the comment of Plato. So there is all these subtles, and Arthur Evans make other references of non-heteronormativity and Crete. So apparently it was known that on that island you could just, be more free than they became afterwards. So, but what was I saying? So women with prominent roles, egalitarianism, freedom of expression of your nature, whatever it is, fight against tyranny. The political side also very important, which also comes later during the repression of the Bacchanalia in Rome. So all of these are threads coming from the mother. From this we understand how weird it is, because he would not be weird in a pre-patriarchal culture. He would be like, everybody else. But then the people that would join his rights would be the ones that have issues in patriarchy. Powerful women, people that don't identify with heteronormativity, people that believe in a more egalitarian and less hierarchical world. These would be the people of Dionysus. Of course, not only, let's not make too huge generalizations, but these people would find in Dionysian rituals a space of safety and freedom.
It's so interesting to me that he wasn't, I guess limited is the word I want to use. Like he wasn't, as affected by the Greek patriarchy as we might expect. He kind of, and the rites around him, kind of went under the radar in a way that is just kind of, it's interesting that he was kind of allowed to continue on like this. And I think them eventually connecting him with theater and wine was also their way of making him fit into the box a little better than he otherwise would have. But it's just interesting to me that it was kind of allowed, not in Rome, obviously, but for a time he was still kind of allowed to be this god of freedom and egalitarianism to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I think because he was recognized as an ancient tradition.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, because sometimes he's recognized as a foreigner,
mm-hmm.
and at the same time as something old. I think Tiresias in the back, he's let me try to remember. Or it's Pentheus that says something about women. When the wine appears, the women go crazy. And the chorus says, don't you respect the gods, like something. And then Tiresias says something about something that has been happening for a long time. It's a law. It turns into something that should always happen. Something like this. So there's always a connection to Dionysus as something that comes from way back.
Yeah. No, that exists always. And he is both new and old. And and Greek and foreign. And that is why he is so interesting as compared to so many of the other gods.
Yeah, and also respected.
Yeah.
And this is also, maybe we speak about what happened in Rome, because now there is all this connection.
Yeah, sure. I'm not as familiar with it, but I know generally what happened, so go ahead.
So more or less in the 2nd century BC, so a bit later, we were talking about the beginning of democracy in Athens, the 5th century BC. So the 2nd century BC, which is after the Hellenistic age, which is more or less the 3rd century BC, the time of Alexander the Great. After Alexander the Great, the cult of Dionysus is exported to Italy, or is imported by the Romans or some people. It was already present in a way, because south of Italy was a Greek colony, so there was something there already happening. But then also before the Romans, in the place where I am now in Tuscany, there was the Etruscan civilization that also had a vegetation god that was also connected to wine, which was Fufluns. I don't know if you've heard of Fufluns.
No.
It's such a funny name. Again, Fufluns means sprout. There's again this connection to sprout.
That's so interesting.
Fufluns. And there is a town called Populonia, and Populonia is the town of Fufluns. So Fufluns was the Etruscan Dionysus. So there was already, people were already doing parties with wine and held in a ceremonial way. So when Dionysus was imported into Roman culture, he became Bacchus, and many people know him as Bacchus.
Well, and he was Bacchus in Greek too, but Rome almost got rid of Dionysus. They made him only Bacchus.
Yeah, Bacchus also is connected to revel, the verb to revel. And I always say that Bacchus is the raver. So the raver arrived in Rome. And the cult just spread. People started doing these initiations without formal authorization of the Senate. So Rome was this quite religiously tolerant culture, as long as a foreign cult was accepted by the Senate. It was tolerated, like it had happened a few years before with Cybele.
I was gonna say, because they really formally bring her over, and they make such a real kind of, it's very specific. So that's very interesting on the other side.
Yeah. But also when they brought Cybele, they didn't realize that all these priests, that
they brought a lot with her.
Self-castrated priests. Again, this is all Dionysian, in a way.
Well, and it's more evidence of these people beyond the binary, these people who do not fit into heteronormativity.
Connected to a goddess that is connected to nature, another mountain
and
goddess.
From Anatolia,
From Anatolia, so all of that. And so Bacchus spread without authorization, and the rites were called Bacchanalia. So the Bacchanalia started happening more and more. And apparently what happened is that the Senate at some point got scared because there were so many people that were initiated. And these people, that's the point that we've been saying until now, they believed in a value system which was different than the value system of the kind of society that Roman society was, which was heavily militarized. Like you had to be a soldier.
And the reliance on enslavement in Rome, different than Greece. Obviously, Greece had it in a heavy way, but the difference was like the threat that the Bacchanalia could cause to Rome was definitely very heavier than what it was in Greece.
Yeah, because then also it was a very misogynist society, and in the Bacchanalia, women had, they were priestesses. They could initiate men, which was seen as a reverse of what was allowed. So this was like no-go.
Mm-hmm.
So militarized, misogynist, homophobic, like it had like super patriarchy square, I don't know how much. So the story that we know is from Titus Livius. That's the only source that we have about this episode known as the Bacchanalia Affair or the repression of the Bacchanalia. He's a Roman historian that wrote about 300 years after the events. And, he tells a story where he makes it into like some kind of soap opera with this ex-slave woman, because slaves were allowed in the initiations. So she was a freed woman and she was about to marry this guy. And she comes to know that someone close to her fiancé is going to initiate him into the Bacchanalia. So she goes to the Senate to speak to the politicians, and she says, I'm going to break the vow of silence that covers what happens in these rituals, because I know what happens, because I've been there as a girl accompanying my owner when I was a slave. And I know that what happens is all kinds of crimes that you can possibly imagine, like all of them, killing, perjury, like rape, like everything. She says, I don't want my fiancé to be initiated. So probably this was an excuse that was made because the threat was actually political.
Yeah. Well, and the idea of like putting it on a woman having done this is like so just over the top too.
Yeah, and also Livy says that, and these rites were already happening for some time in Italy, and there was this priestess from Campania, which is the region of Naples, which is also an interesting, like, Campanian priestess that was already changing the rules and making the rituals happening during the night and many times a month, and like all of these new rules created by her. So there was, also she was depicted as a dangerous woman because she was able to change rules of rituals or to create her own rules. And so the Senate decides to repress, decides, okay, we have a great story, we have a great excuse to talk to the people of Rome in a public assembly and explain why we want to repress, because they knew that this was an ancient tradition coming from Greece even. So they had to show some kind of respect in front of the people, and this is also interesting. So we have the speech of Consul Lucius Postumius from Titus Livy, or Livy, I don't know how you say it. Tito Livio.
We say Livy in most English, I think.
So we have the speech of Consul Lucius Postumius, which probably is the most historical document, like part of the story, of the whole story. And it's amazing to read the speech because he's really like, okay, guys, I know you've heard them. They're so loud at night. Like some people say it's some kind of ritual. Some other people say they're just having fun, you know. And if I tell you how many people they are, you would be seized by extreme terror. And especially if I tell you what kind of people they are. First of all, they are women, and they are the source of this evil thing. It's just amazing to read it. And then
it feels so modern now too. It's like, yeah, just like all the ways that now fear is used against people who don't fit. Just like all, yeah, wow.
And then there is men. Then there is males, scarcely distinguishable from females.
Oh God.
Having lost their mind for lack of sleep, for drink, you know, and then he said something like, so these dancing freaks, these dancing faggots, literally, according to him, do you think they would take the sword to defend the chastity of your wives and children?
Oh my gosh.
You know, so he goes straight into this issue of male pride and the fact that if you dance, you're not a soldier. And the true thing that if you belong to that kind of worldview, if you believe in that worldview and value system, then you don't want to take the sword and kill other people. Which in that kind of situation, then it was a big problem. Because also the age of men when they were initiated in the bacchanalia and starting to, the army, was the same age. It was like teenage.
Right.
So, yeah, do you think that people that took this oath of allegiance would defend the chastity of your wife and children? So there is something about oath of allegiance towards Dionysus or Bacchus was actually stronger. This bond connecting the initiates with Dionysus and his worldview, than the bond that connected citizens to the Senate. So this was a big problem. So then he, because as I was saying, they know that this is a very ancient and respected tradition. So they don't prohibit the cult completely, but they make very strict rules to perform it, which is the same thing, but done in a way that, we still allow you to do it, but to get the authorization, you have to have 100 senators, or you cannot be more than 5, and there cannot be any shared money. And they were cutting all of the, the independence of these associations. So then he reads the actual, the law. So this is part of the law, all these conditions to practice the cult. And that those who've been practicing the cult, they need to appear in front of the authorities. They can go to jail or get killed. So the law is called Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus. And the text of the law that we only had in Titus Livio Aburbe Condita, that was the name of the book on the history of Rome. Actually, in the 1700s, was found a copy in a bronze plaque in southern Italy during the excavation of a villa of this Austrian noble, aristocrat, because southern Italy was under Austria in the 1700s. So they found, it's like this big. I saw it. It's in the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna. So they found the actual text of the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus. So this is the proof that the historian's story is true. The Senate really repressed the Bacchanalia.
Yeah.
So the story goes on that he says that the city was seized by so much terror that it resulted in a depopulation. So many people ran away trying to escape the authorities. Many people committed suicide. And apparently, we don't know the numbers, but this is the first mass, what's the word, repression of people practicing altered state of consciousness, which would, with Christianity would become like...
Yeah, very common. Yeah, that's... So there was also like a rebranding of Dionysus in Rome too, right? Because they start calling him Liber, and he becomes this like very different god, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like Liber, I know that it's another name also connected to the fact that in his rituals you would experience some kind of liberation. But I don't know in terms of rituals or different lineage.
Yeah.
I don't
As
know.
far as I understand it, it's that he was kind of rebranded to be less threatening to Rome. So they could like continue to acknowledge that he was a god that people wanted to worship. And they gave him this word that means like free. So it's like, oh, he's the same. But really, when they're calling him that, he's representing this like stifled version.
Oh, this is cool. Because probably, they Romanized him. They tried to Romanize him.
Because they had Bacchus. He could have continued to be Bacchus, but when he was Bacchus, he represented the thing that Rome wanted to stop, and so they gave him this name of Liber instead. That's my understanding. But
it makes sense.
Fits. Yeah.
So we went all the way from old Europe in the 5000 BC.
Yes.
To 200 BC, just before Christ. So more or less, this is the whole story.
Yeah, well, I mean, that fit beautifully into my scheduled time, so I think we're just like, how wonderfully ideal. Thank you so much for doing this. It was so interesting and so much fun. Do you want to share with my listeners like where they might learn more from you, or if you want to be followed anywhere?
Yeah, so because I didn't say actually that, for some years I've been working as curator of the cultural area of the festival where I had that epiphany.
Yeah.
For 13 years. And then I moved out of the festival last summer. So now actually this is more and more my job of teaching about Dionysus and writing. So I'm about to make my website. I still don't have a website, but you can follow me on Instagram. My handle is @IamAlwaysChiara.
Great.
See, I am always Chiara. At the moment, that's the main place. I'm also a DJ Clandestina. I'm on SoundCloud. And also, if you follow me on Instagram, you get connected also to my music.
Yeah. That's so cool. That's so very Dionysus of you.
It's the embodied part. Otherwise, I'm always with the computer. But I just gave a course on Advaya. It's an educational platform.
Oh, okay.
On Dionysus. I will keep on giving courses on that platform. Advaya with a Y.
Okay.
.life is the website.
Yeah. I can link to all these things in the episode description too, so people can find them there.
And I have some essays on my profile on academia.edu, but they're a bit old, I think. Okay. Now I'm in the process of like updating everything and refreshing everything. And I am a PhD candidate at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where, all of everything that we talked about is going to turn into my dissertation. So I hope I'm going to be able to publish that. And I co-curated an anthology called The Psychedelic Mysteries of the Feminine, with different essays on these topics of feminine principle and altered state of consciousness. There is an essay I wrote on the Maenads, the role of women in the cult of Dionysus.
Oh, that's amazing.
So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So many things. That's so great. Well, again, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so thrilled to have the episode. It was really fun talking to you and nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Liv. It was my honor. Thank you for giving space to my voice. And yeah, let's see how it ripples.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy too. Oh, nerds, thank you so much for listening. I imagine now you understand how it was so hard for me to kind of conceptualize what this episode was about. It was just so wonderfully interesting and spanned so many different things. And honestly, it went so many different places I wasn't expecting, but I was absolutely here for. It was just so much fun. So thank you so much to Chiara for coming on the show, reaching out to talk about this. It was absolutely fascinating. You can find some of the things that she mentioned at the end there in the episode's description. And gods, I mean, I could and will talk about Dionysus forever and always as much as humanly possible. So I'm just always here for new conversations on that god who just doesn't fit in anywhere and yet does fit in everywhere. He's old and he's young and he's fascinating. I fucking love Dionysus. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians, my assistant producer. Laura Smith is the audio engineer and production assistant. The podcast is part of the iHeart Podcast Network. Listen on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Help me continue bringing you the world of Greek mythology and the ancient Mediterranean by becoming a patron, where you'll get access to loads of past bonus episodes and ongoing new ones as much as I can manage them. That's patreon.com/mythsbaby. And I am Liv, and I really love this shit.